Now we come to perspective, which basically indicates spatial relationships within the image. So we're indicating how the different forms work together within this artificial space, usually three-dimensional space, that we're creating within the canvas or the drawing. And there's two ways that we tend to see this done. The first is linear or scientific perspective. And linear perspective only works in man-made environments. It doesn't work in nature because we don't see a lot of natural horizontal lines out there in nature, but you would in a man-made environment. For example, a hallway, the interior of a room, or in this case, the middle of a city. And the way it works is actually quite simple. The artist will choose the vanishing point, and then all horizontal lines in the image must lead back to that vanishing point. So, for example, if I was trying to create something like this, what I could do is put a pin here in the vanishing point and use a string that comes out from it to make sure that all of these lines are perfect as they move back towards that vanishing point. And I could create a beautiful, perfect in perspective image with very minimal effort. That vanishing point oftentimes is on the horizon, but in some cases, as we will see, it is not. So when the artist moves that vanishing point, they can change where we focus on an image, because our eye will follow the vanishing point before it follows anything else in these images. We also see the converging lines here of the railroad tracks moving back towards that vanishing point. Now, what do we do when you're out in nature? What do you do if you're trying to create a landscape? Well, you use something called atmospheric perspective. And by the way, you can use this to create a beautiful mural in your dorm room or apartment. You simply pick one color as your starting color here. You paint in your hill, you add a few drops of white, you do it again. And as you move back, adding more and more white, you get perfect atmospheric perspective. Although you wouldn't use white, you would use another much lighter color. Not lighter than white, lighter than whatever you're starting with. And the way this works is basically saturation decreases with distance. So the further away something is outdoors, the less we're going to see the color. Imagine you're driving down I-94 and you look off into the distance and a hill is just that very subtle blue where it's just darker than the sky. As it comes closer, it becomes a darker blue. Eventually it becomes a green. Eventually you start to see details like the trees, and then you see the leaves and the squirrels, and you realize you're not on the road anymore. You've driven off into a woods. But the point is, not only will the saturation increase, the brightness of the color or the intensity of the color, but also the detail will increase. So both of these are used when you create atmospheric perspective. We also create perspective through the use of chiaroscuro. Now in art, we tend to use these fancy Italian terms. In this case, we call it chiaroscuro because spaghetti was already taken. And chiaroscuro is simply using light and shadow to create the illusion of three-dimensional space. Of course, we're not actually creating three-dimensional space. So you have your highlight, you have light color, you have shadow, reflected light, etc. And many of you probably did this in high school, drawing a tennis ball or drawing a ball to get that sense of shading. So this same principle is used throughout art, especially from the Renaissance up until about 1870 when we start getting into ideas of abstraction. When you're trying to create something that's three-dimensional, paying attention to that light and shadow can be key to creating really inviting, really realistic three-dimensional space.